After watching these stories, don't forget to write what you would have done in the main character's place. Now, let's move on to the stories. Rain drums against the roof of an old two-story house on the outskirts of the city. The wind pounds against the windows as if trying to force its way inside. The camera slowly moves down the dimly lit hallway, illuminated only by the weak moonlight filtering through a gap in the curtains. Family photographs line the walls. Chandler, a 27-year-old man, and his son Joel, who just turned 5. Their smiles in the pictures seem genuine, but the atmosphere in the house at this moment is anything but warm. Chandler sits on the living room couch, holding a cup of coffee. His face is exhausted, his eyes sunken. He frequently glances at the clock. It's late, but he can't sleep. From upstairs, in Joel's room, faint murmuring can be heard. Chandler tries to ignore it. Lately, his son has been talking to himself often, but doctors assured him that it's normal for kids his age. He's just playing, Chandler repeats to himself, but there's unease in his voice. The camera shifts upstairs to Joel's room. The door is slightly ajar, revealing the boy sitting on his bed, clutching an old teddy bear. The bear looks worn, one eye missing, and its fabric torn at the belly. Joel whispers something to the bear, but the words are indistinguishable. Suddenly, he stops and slowly turns his head toward the door. His eyes widen as if he sees something the camera doesn't. He whispers, "He's already here." Chandler rises from the couch at the sound of something falling upstairs. He sets the cup down and heads for the stairs. "Joel? Are you okay?" he calls, but there's no response. As he ascends, the air grows colder. The door to Joel's room is now fully open, but the boy is nowhere in sight. On the floor lies the teddy bear. Chandler picks it up and feels something small slip out from its torn belly, a tiny, rolled-up note. He unrolls it and reads, "Don't let him find me." Chandler quickly scans the room. The window is shut, the doors to the other rooms are closed. Where could Joel have gone? Panic rises as he rushes through the house, checking the kitchen, the bathroom, even the basement. Nothing. Then, he hears quiet laughter from the downstairs bedroom. He runs inside and sees Joel standing in the corner, facing the wall. "Joel? What are you doing?" Chandler asks, stepping closer. Joel slowly turns. His face is pale, his eyes empty. "He said I can play with him," the boy murmurs, pointing to the empty corner. A shiver runs down Chandler's spine. He follows Joel's gaze, but there's nothing there. "Who said?" Chandler asks, forcing his voice to remain calm. "The man in the wall," Joel replies. His voice sounds different. A deep chill seeps into Chandler's bones. He lifts his son into his arms and hurries out of the room. But before leaving, he steals one last glance at the corner. There, on the wall, he notices a crack, thin but unnatural. It looks like someone has been trying to break through. The next day, Chandler tries to make sense of what happened. He questions Joel, but the boy only remembers playing with a friend. Determined to uncover the truth, Chandler starts researching the house's history. He discovers that the previous owners, a family of 3, vanished under mysterious circumstances. The only survivor was their son, who was later committed to a psychiatric hospital. The archive newspaper articles mention that the boy repeatedly spoke of the man in the wall. Meanwhile, the strange occurrences intensify. Chandler hears footsteps in the house when no one else is home. Joel begins drawing eerie pictures, dark figures moving inside the walls. One night, Chandler wakes to the sound of Joel screaming. He rushes into his son's room and finds him sitting on the bed, pointing at the wall. "He wants me to go with him," Joel whispers. Chandler looks at the wall and sees the crack growing wider. A dull thudding sound echoes from within, as if something is trying to get out. Desperate, Chandler grabs a hammer and starts breaking through the wall. Behind the plaster, he finds a hollow space filled with old children's toys and another note. "He will always find you." That night, Chandler wakes to find Joel missing from his bed. He sprints to his son's room and sees the boy standing in front of the partially destroyed wall. "Joel, step away!" he yells, but the boy doesn't move. The wall begins to crack open. From the darkness, a figure emerges, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes and elongated fingers that resemble claws. It reaches for Joel. Chandler lunges forward and grabs his son, but the entity's hand latches onto his wrist. A struggle ensues, the creature's grip ice cold and unyielding. With all his strength, Chandler wrenches Joel free and bolts downstairs, the creature's footsteps echoing behind them. He locks himself in the bathroom, heart pounding as the door rattles under heavy blows. Chandler calls the police. When they arrive, the entity is gone. The officers don't believe his story but agree to investigate. He decides to move out immediately. Before leaving, he steps into Joel's room one last time. His eyes fall on the wall he had partially broken. A fresh drawing is there, Joel's. It depicts a dark figure standing at the door of their new house. Chandler and Joel settle into their new home, trying to move on. But each night, Chandler hears a faint tapping in the walls. He tells himself it's just the pipes, until one night, he sees Joel standing by the wall, whispering, "He found us." The camera pulls back, revealing a crack slowly spreading across the surface. Silence. A thick, heavy silence envelops the old wooden house, lost deep in the forest. Night. The windows are covered with heavy curtains, but a faint beam of moonlight seeps through a gap. The camera slowly moves down a dimly lit hallway, illuminated only by a small nightlight that barely disperses the darkness. Framed photographs line the walls, a family, a mother, a father, and their young daughter, Amy. Their smiles in the pictures seem genuine, but the atmosphere in the house now feels entirely different. Amy, a 7-year-old girl, sits on the floor of her bedroom, surrounded by toys. She whispers something, playing with an old-fashioned doll that looks like it's from another century. The doll has long hair, wears a pale pink dress, and its glassy eyes gleam in the dim light. Amy talks to it as if it's her best friend. "You promised me we'd play forever," she whispers, and her voice sounds as if she's not speaking alone. The camera shifts to the bedroom door. It's slightly ajar, and through the narrow gap, a shadow stands motionless in the hallway. It doesn't move, just lingers, watching. Suddenly, Amy lifts her head and stares directly at the door. "Mom?" she asks, but there's no answer. The shadow begins to shift, and the door creaks open wider. Amy clutches the doll tighter, her eyes widening. "You came," she whispers. Downstairs in the kitchen, Laura, Amy's mother, stands at the sink washing dishes. Her face is exhausted, her eyes sunken. She keeps glancing at the clock. It's late, but she can't sleep. Amy has been withdrawn lately. She spends all her time playing with that doll she found in the attic. Laura tries to ignore it, but something about her daughter's behavior unsettles her. Suddenly, she hears a faint giggle from upstairs. "Amy?" she calls, but there's no response. Drying her hands, she heads toward the stairs. As she climbs, the air grows noticeably colder. Amy's bedroom door is slightly open, and Laura peeks inside. The girl is sitting on her bed, holding the doll in her lap. "Amy, what are you doing? Why aren't you asleep?" Laura asks, trying to sound calm. Amy slowly turns to her mother. Her face is pale, her eyes empty. "She said I could play with her," the girl murmurs, pointing at the doll. A chill crawls up Laura's spine. She steps closer and takes the doll from Amy's hands. "Who said that?" she asks, but Amy doesn't answer. Instead, she stares past her mother, as if seeing something Laura cannot. Laura turns around, but there's nothing there. She places the doll on a shelf and takes Amy's hand. "Come on, sweetheart, it's bedtime," she says, though there's unease in her voice. She leads Amy out of the room and shuts the door behind them. But before leaving, she casts one last glance at the doll. Its glassy eyes seem to follow her. The next day, Laura tries to understand what happened last night. She questions Amy, but the girl remembers nothing except playing with a friend. Laura decides to investigate. She discovers that the house they bought 5 years ago once belonged to a family who mysteriously disappeared. The only survivor was their daughter, who was later sent to a psychiatric hospital. In old newspaper clippings, Laura reads that the girl kept talking about the doll that comes to life. Meanwhile, strange occurrences in the house escalate. Laura hears footsteps when no one is there. Amy starts drawing unsettling pictures, dark figures lurking inside the walls. One night, Laura wakes to the sound of Amy screaming. Rushing into her daughter's room, she finds the girl sitting up in bed, pointing at the wall. "She wants me to go with her," Amy whispers. Laura stares at the wall, noticing that a crack she had seen earlier is widening. A faint, rhythmic knocking comes from inside, as if something is trying to get out. Determined to act, Laura grabs a hammer and starts breaking through the wall. Behind the plaster, she finds a hollow space filled with old children's toys, and another doll, nearly identical to the one Amy has. Its dress bears an embroidered name, Martha. That night, Laura wakes up to find Amy missing from her bed. Panic surges through her as she rushes to her daughter's room. Amy stands before the broken wall, staring into the darkness beyond. "Amy, step away!" Laura cries, but the girl doesn't move. The wall begins to split further, and from the darkness emerges a tall, gaunt woman with empty eye sockets and unnaturally long fingers, curling like claws. She stretches her hand toward Amy. Laura lunges forward and grabs her daughter, but the figure seizes her wrist. A desperate struggle ensues, the entity's grip ice cold and inhumanly strong. With all her strength, Laura tears Amy away and sprints down the stairs, the creature's heavy footsteps echoing behind them. She locks herself and Amy in the bathroom, her heart pounding as the relentless knocking on the door grows louder. Laura calls the police, but by the time they arrive, the entity is gone. No trace of the broken wall remains. The officers don't believe her, but they agree to investigate. Laura makes a decision: she and Amy will leave. Before departing, she returns to Amy's room one last time. On the wall, where the crack once was, a new drawing appears, a shadowy figure standing at the doorstep of their new home. Laura and Amy settle into a different house, trying to move on. But every night, Laura hears faint tapping in the walls. She convinces herself it's just the pipes, until one evening, she sees Amy standing by the wall, whispering, "She found us." The camera slowly pulls back, revealing a new crack forming in the wall, growing wider. A quiet evening in a small suburb. A modern-style house stands apart from the others, surrounded by dense trees. Its windows glow with warm yellow light, but inside, the atmosphere is tense. The camera moves slowly through the living room, where a man, David, 35, sits on the couch. His face is exhausted, his eyes filled with anxiety. Scattered across the table before him are photographs, himself, his wife Lisa, and their 8-year-old son, Ethan. In the last photo, Ethan is smiling, but something in his eyes seems off. David picks up the photo, staring at it as if trying to decipher something. Suddenly, from upstairs, in Ethan's room, a quiet laugh echoes. David flinches and sets the photo down. "Ethan?" he calls, but there's no response. He rises and walks toward the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The camera follows as he stops at his son's bedroom door. It's slightly ajar, and through the gap, he sees Ethan sitting on the floor, drawing. Toys are scattered around him, but something about the scene feels wrong. His movements are abrupt, uneven, as if he's not in control of himself. David pushes the door open wider. "Ethan, what are you doing?" he asks, but his son doesn't respond. As David steps closer, he sees that Ethan is drawing something strange, dark figures resembling human silhouettes but with limbs too long and faces completely blank. "Who are they?" David asks, trying to keep his voice calm. Ethan slowly lifts his head, looking up at his father. His eyes are wide open, and his lips curl into a smile that seems unnaturally mature. "They came," Ethan whispers, but his voice doesn't sound like his own. The next day, David tries to make sense of what happened the night before. He asks Ethan about it, but the boy remembers nothing except that he had a dream. Determined to find answers, David starts digging into the house's past. He discovers that the home they bought 5 years ago once belonged to a family that mysteriously vanished. The only survivor was their son, who was later sent to a psychiatric hospital. David finds old newspaper clippings revealing that the boy constantly spoke of shadows living in the walls. Meanwhile, strange occurrences in the house escalate. David hears footsteps when no one is there, and Ethan continues drawing unsettling images, dark figures that seem to shift and move within the walls. One night, David wakes to Ethan's terrified screams. He rushes to his son's room and finds him sitting up in bed, pointing at the wall. "They want me to go with them," Ethan whispers. David looks at the wall and sees a crack he hadn't noticed before, one that now appears to be widening. A deep, muffled thudding comes from inside, as if something is trying to break through. Desperate, David grabs a hammer and starts smashing at the wall, trying to uncover the source. Beneath the plaster, he finds a hollow space filled with old children's toys, and a drawing eerily similar to Ethan's. A dark figure with elongated limbs. Scrawled beneath it are the words, "They will always find you." Determined to understand the truth, David tracks down the last surviving member of the vanished family, a man now living in a psychiatric hospital. "The shadows," the man says, "they live in the walls. They take children. They play with them." David doesn't know whether to believe him, but he can't ignore the growing danger. When he returns home, he becomes increasingly protective of Ethan, but the shadows grow bolder. One night, David wakes to find Ethan standing in front of the wall, whispering, "Who are you talking to?" David demands, stepping closer. Ethan doesn't react. Then the wall cracks open. A dark figure emerges, tall, skeletal, with hollow eye sockets and elongated fingers that resemble claws. It reaches for Ethan. David lunges forward, grabbing his son, but the creature's icy fingers clamp onto his arm. A desperate struggle ensues, the house shaking as if something inside it is alive. With all his strength, David wrenches Ethan away and runs, carrying his son. He races down the stairs, the shadow figure pursuing them. Its footsteps echo through the house. David locks himself and Ethan in the bathroom, pressing his weight against the door as the relentless pounding grows louder. David calls the police, but when they arrive, the creature is gone. No one believes him. The police conduct an investigation but find nothing. The incident is dismissed as a stress-induced hallucination. David decides to leave. He packs their things, determined to get Ethan as far away as possible. But before they go, he steps into Ethan's room one last time. On the damaged wall, there is a new drawing, a dark figure, standing beside the door of their new home. David and Ethan settle into their new house. Everything seems fine. Safe. But each night, David hears a faint tapping in the walls. He tells himself it's just the pipes, just the house settling. But then, one evening, he walks past Ethan's room and sees his son standing before the wall, whispering, "They found us," Ethan murmurs. The camera slowly pulls back, revealing a crack in the wall. It begins to spread,